Hare Krishna devotees, welcome to day 51 of our Bhakti Vaibhava seminar on Srimad Bhagavatam Canto 4. We are in chapter 22, Prithu Maharaja's meeting with the four Kumars, and we're continuing with verse 24 today. But first of all, let us chant our prayers. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastya Chadesha Tarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Pramanachananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchkalpaturubhyas kripa sindhubhya eva cha, Patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. All right, devotee is very good. Verse 24. A candidate for spiritual advancement must be non-violent, must follow in the footsteps of great acharyas, must always remember the nectar of the pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, must follow the regulative principles without material desire, and while following the regulative principles, should not blaspheme others. A devotee should lead a very simple life, and not be disturbed by the duality of opposing elements. He should learn to tolerate them. So, the devotees are the real sadhus. The devotees are the real sadhus, saintly persons, and first qualification of a sadhu is ahimsa, non-violent. To be non-violent. Srila Prabhupada refers to Bhagavatam 3:25-21, which is talking about the qualities of a sadhu, and that verse begins Titikshava Karunika, that a sadhu, devotee, must be very tolerant and compassionate, and tolerate. So tolerate means to tolerate personal injury. Prabhupada says personal inconvenience. But if someone else is injured or somehow mistreated, then the sadhu, the devotee, does not have to tolerate that. So the material world is full of violence. And in a certain sense, the first business of a devotee is to stop the violence, including violence to animals. Yes, the unnecessary slaughter of animals. And this is on the basis of the devotee being a friend to all living entities. All living entities are children of the Lord, not only the devotee. So therefore the devotee is Surida Sarvadehinam, true friend of all, with Krishna as the Father. This is ahimsa. And it's only possible really to practice this when we follow the acharya in disciplic succession. So we go on, devotees, to the second paragraph. And Prabhupada speaks extremely strongly about anyone trying to advance in spiritual life outside the disciplic succession. Actually, the word he uses is that it's simply ludicrous. You could hardly say anything stronger than that. So, therefore, it's said, Acharyavan Purusho Veda, that one who follows the Acharya knows things as they are. That's and then famous Well, that's from Chandogya Upanishad, then famous line from Mundaka Upanishad 1-12, Tad Vigyanartam Sagurume Vabhigach Chet. In order to understand the transcendental science, one has to approach the bona fide spiritual master. Then Srila Prabhupada points out that the word smritya in this verse, smritya, is very important in a general sense in spiritual life. Smritya means remembering Krishna always. We have to mold our lives like that, so that while doing whatever we do, eating, sleeping, walking, working, we remain in Krishna, connected with Krishna, remembering Krishna. In ISKCON, the devotees are always hearing about Krishna, whatever they do. Smartavya satatam Vishno. It's a famous verse. It's quoted in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Lord Vishnu should be remembered always, constantly. Vismartavyo na jatuchit, and never forgotten. So this is smritya. This is the real smritya. So it can be continued if we constantly hear from Srimad Bhagavatam. And this can be done, being concentrated in Krishna consciousness like this, can be achieved by people who are strictly following the rules, the regulative principles. So therefore Prabhupada says we recommend devotees chant 16 rounds, follow the regulative principles, and this will help the devotees always to be fixed in spiritual advancement. Then third paragraph, it's also stated in this verse that you can advance by controlling the senses. Then you can become a Swami, a Goswami, but you must be very strict in controlling the senses. And therefore, it's possible to do like this if you don't desire material sense gratification. Particularly if you have a higher taste through engaging in devotional service, then the desire for sense gratification will reduce and actually fall away. But if the senses want to work independently, just for themselves, sense gratification, well, that has to be controlled. And Prabhupada says, if we simply practice avoiding material sense gratification, controlling the senses is automatically achieved. But it's not actually mentioned here, but it is, of course, mentioned many other places, that in order to do that, avoid material sense gratification, we need the higher taste of engagement in devotional service, the senses being connected with Krishna by doing service for him. Then we go on to the fourth paragraph. Prabhupada says, very important point, to be anindaya. Anindaya means we shouldn't criticize other people's methods of religion. The thing is, different methods are there, different types of religious systems are there under different of the modes. And so you get religious systems in passion and ignorance. And obviously those cannot be equal to those in goodness. Yes, and we find in Bhagavad Gita, 14th chapter, 17th chapter, and 18th chapter, that the Bhagavad Gita divides up so many things according to the modes. So when someone is in general under passion and ignorance, that person's religion will be the same. It'll also be under passion and ignorance. So the devotee, rather than just criticize them, Prabhupada says, should encourage them to stick to their principles so they can gradually come to goodness. And if we simply criticize, we'll be agitated. Of course, they'll be agitated too. You may have had experience, I know I have, at least in the past, way back in the past, of meeting born-again Christians, different places on different occasions, and, some sort of discussion starts, and they're just so, fixed, I guess you could say. And we're also so fixed in our standards. And so it just turns into an argument, and it's just disturbing for both parties. So Prabhupada says we should tolerate and learn to stop that agitation. So there is, devotees, a fifth paragraph also, just see. It really is a big purport. So another feature of the devotee, Prabhupada says, is nirihaya, simple living. Niriha means gentle, meek, or simple. So a devotee must not live gorgeously, imitating the materialist. Plain living and high thinking is recommended. And just in terms of material facilities and material requirements and so on, the devotee should accept only as much as is needed to keep the body fit for devotional service, not eating or sleeping more than required. Eat to live and don't live to eat. Prabhupada says sleeping 6 to 7 hours. All devotees must do like this. So, of course, as long as we have material bodies, our bodies will be affected by climatic changes, disease, natural disturbances, threefold miseries. It's unavoidable. And Prabhupada mentions that sometimes Prabhupada says, a neophyte devotee questions, why have they fallen sick, although they're devotees? They're pursuing Krishna consciousness. So Prabhupada makes the point that such devotees must learn from this verse to become tolerant. This is a world of duality. Don't think that if we become sick, we've fallen from Krishna consciousness. Krishna consciousness can continue unimpeded by any material or from any material opposition. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, Lord Sri Krishna therefore advises in Bhagavad Gita 2:14, tam statikshasva bharata. My dear Arjuna, please try to tolerate all these disturbances. Be fixed in your Krishna conscious activities. So on we go, devotees, to verse 25. The devotee should gradually increase the culture of devotional service by constant hearing of the transcendental qualities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. These pastimes are like ornamental decorations on the ears of the devotees. By rendering devotional service and transcending the material qualities, one can easily be fixed in transcendence in the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So again, it's, substantial purport. It's 2 paragraphs, but pretty substantial. So Prabhupada says that this verse is especially to substantiate hearing. Devotee doesn't like to hear anything other than spiritual things, Krishna-conscious things, pastimes of the Lord, the philosophy of the Lord, etc. And our propensity for devotional service, for becoming more absorbed in devotional service, it increases by hearing Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam from realized souls. In our case, particularly Srila Prabhupada. The more we hear from them, the more we advance. And the more we advance spiritually, devotionally, the more we become detached from the material world. As Lord Chaitanya advises. So a devotee who wants to progress must lose interest in sense gratification and lose interest in associating with people who are after money and sense gratification. This is Lord Chaitanya's advice from Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila, chapter 11, verse 8. Okay, here's the translation of that, Madhya Lila, chapter 11, verse 8. Greatly lamenting, the Lord then informed Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, alas, for a person who's seriously desiring to cross the material ocean and engage in the transcendental loving service of the Lord without material motives, seeing a materialist engaged in sense gratification, or seeing a woman who's similarly interested, is more abominable than drinking poison willingly. How's that? Pretty powerful. So Srila Prabhupada continues, 2nd paragraph, the word Brahmani, which appears in the verse 25 itself, is commented on by the impersonalists or the professional reciters who are mainly Prabhupada says, they're mainly advocates of the caste system by demoniac birthright. Prabhupada, sure, really driving the point home. So they say that Brahmani means the impersonal Brahman. But they can't say this because also there are the words bhaktiya and gunabhidanena. So, of course, according to the impersonalists, one of the fundamental features of the impersonal Brahman is that it has no qualities. No qualities. It's all one. So therefore we should understand that actually this term Brahmani means some Brahman, but not impersonal Brahman. It means the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Para-Brahman. So Krishna, that is Krishna, as Arjuna confirms in Bhagavad Gita. So therefore, wherever we see the word Brahma, Prabhupada says, it must refer to Krishna and not the impersonal Brahman. And famous verse in this regard, Bhagavatam 1-11, which says, Brahmeti Paramatmeti Bhagavan iti Shabdyate. That Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan are all Brahman. Yes, but Krishna is the supreme Brahman. And so when there, as in the case of this verse 25, when along with this term Brahman, there's reference to the word Bhakti, or something to do with transcendental qualities, this must indicate the Lord, not the impersonal Brahman. Verse 26, upon becoming fixed in his attachment to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, by the grace of the spiritual master and by awakening knowledge and detachment, the living entity situated within the heart of the body and covered by the 5 elements burns up his material surroundings, exactly as fire arising from wood burns the wood itself. Yes. So Srila Prabhupada gives a detailed purport here. First point Prabhupada makes is that it's said in Shastra by acharyas like that, not just it's said casually, but it's said in these authoritative sources that both the jiva and the supersoul are living together in the heart. And Prabhupada quotes, doesn't exactly say where from, but Vedic version, Hridi Hyayam Atma, the soul and supersoul are in the heart. And the soul is liberated when it comes out of the material heart, or when that materialistic heart is cleansed and becomes spiritualized. So there's an appropriate example given here. Yonim ivotigni, that Agni or fire comes out of wood, and by it the wood is destroyed. That's what the verse has said, isn't it? That fire is there within the wood, and so therefore we can draw it out of the wood. But then by that process, the wood is destroyed, is burnt to ashes. So similarly, when the living entity increases attachment for the Lord, he's like fire. Then Prabhupada makes the point, interesting point, fire is visible. How can you perceive fire? By heat and light. So similarly, with the example of the soul being like fire, when the living entity in the heart is enlightened with spiritual knowledge and detached from the world, he burns up the covering of the 5 elements, means earth, water, fire, air, and ether, and becomes free from the 5 kinds of material attachments, which Prabhupada lists out as ignorance, false egoism, attachment to the material world, envy, and absorption in material consciousness. Therefore, Prabhupada says the Panch Atmakam in this verse refers either to the 5 elements, earth, water, fire, air, and ether, or these 5 attachments we just listed out. And when they're all burned by knowledge and detachment, one becomes fixed, one is fixed in devotional service to the Lord. But unless one takes shelter of a bona fide spiritual master, and by his instructions one advances one's attraction for Krishna, that fire cannot be uncovered. Yeah, so we have to take shelter of spiritual master and his instructions to learn more about devotional service and then on that basis of devotional service, become detached from the world or just anything other than Krishna conscious devotional service. So therefore, the advanced devotee doesn't exactly, well, in fact, the advanced devotee doesn't live in the material body, but in the spiritual body. Like a dry coconut, if you have a coconut shell dry, it's really quite dry. You shake it, you'll hear inside there's like a rattling. That means the actual, so to speak, flesh of the coconut has dried out and become detached from the husk, although within the husk. So like this very advanced devotee who's realized his spiritual nature, spiritual identity even, lives in that spiritual identity as the eternal devotee of the Lord, even though within the outer casing of the material body. So therefore the pure devotee's body is called Chinmaya Sharira, spiritualized body. So in this way, the pure devotee's body is not connected with material activities, and the devotee is always liberated. As Bhagavad Gita 14:26 says, Brahma Bhuyaya Kalpate. Let's just, well, anyway, you can look for 14:26. We've read it before. That one who engages in full devotional service doesn't fall down under any circumstances, at once transcends the modes of material nature and comes to the level of Brahman. And then Prabhupada quotes Srila Rupa Goswami also, just immediately after, famous verse, Iha yasya hare dasya karamana manasagira, Nikolas vapyavastasu, Jivan mukta sauchite. Prabhupada gives a translation. Whatever his condition may be, one who's engaged fully with his body, mind, and speech in the service of the Lord is liberated even within the body, the material body. 27. When a person becomes devoid of all material desires and liberated from all material qualities, he transcends distinctions between actions executed externally and internally. At that time, the difference between the soul and the supersoul, which was existing before self-realization, is annihilated, the difference between them. When a dream is over, there's no longer a distinction between the dream and the dreamer. So again, an extensive purport. Prabhupada refers to Rupa Goswami, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, although it's quoted in Chaitanya Charitamrita, and Yabhilashita Shunyam. We have to be devoid of all material desires, material interests, speculative knowledge, etc. Like that. These things should be shunya. Shunya means zero. And then you're freed from the material body. And we just gave a couple of minutes ago the example of the coconut, the dry coconut, and the flesh inside has separated from the husk. So the devotee is living in his or her spiritual identity, and this, of course, is very much the liberated stage. Prabhupada brings up an interesting point. It's from Srimad Bhagavatam 2.10.6, which says that mukti, liberation, means swarupena vyavastiti. Muktir hidvanyata rupam swarupena vyavastiti. it means that real, the real form or the real liberation means swarupena, to be situated in your original transcendental form or nature, constitutional position. So material desires are there while we're in the bodily concept. But when we're in the concept that we're the eternal servant of Krishna, when we're fixed like that, our desires are no longer material. And then the devotee acts in that consciousness. In other words, then the devotee is actually liberated. So let's go on to the second paragraph of the purport. When someone's liberated, they don't do anything for personal sense gratification. All of the devotees then are absolute. But in the conditioned state, there are two kinds of activities. First of all, one acts on behalf of the body, and then one acts to become liberated. So two kinds of activities, but anyway, they're sort of coexisting or like that. So the devotee, when free from material desires or qualities, transcends the duality of action for the body and the soul. And therefore Rupa Goswami speaks the verse which we just read at the end of the previous purport, right at the end there. Iha yasya hariya darsya, that particular verse, that when you're completely fixed in devotional service, then you're liberated under all circumstances, in any condition of life, jivan mukta. So in such a condition, there's no distinction between actions for sense gratification or for liberation, because all the devotees' activities are simply done in devotional service. Yes. And so when you're free from desires for sense gratification, you no longer have to suffer the reactions of lamentation or illusion. Karmis and jnanis, they're subject to those things, but self-realized devotees are free, completely free. And this is a state, a type of state of oneness with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It doesn't mean that the devotee loses his or her individuality. It just means that the devotee no longer has separate desires. That's what it means. So all the desires for such a devotee are fully in devotional service, nothing for personal sense gratification. So therefore the devotee only sees the Lord, personal interest perishes, and it's like coming out of a dream. That then the dream vanishes, it's just not there any longer. In a dream we may think we're a king or some big person with all sorts of royal things, but when you come out of the dream and you're awake, then you're back into your situation as it is. So similarly, a liberated person understands he's part and parcel of the Lord, acting in accord with the Lord's desires. So in that sense, no distinction between himself and the Lord, although both are individuals still. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, Nityo Nityanam Chaitanas Chaitananam. Famous verse from Katha Upanishad. That there are many eternal living entities. But there are two classes of them. One class has one member. The other class has many members. The class which has one member is the Lord, and the class with many members, that's us. Verse 28, when the soul exists for sense gratification, he creates different desires, and for that reason he becomes subjected to designations. But when one is in the transcendental position, he's no longer interested in anything except fulfilling the desires of the Lord. Well, that's really specific, isn't it? I mean, that's really to the point. That being covered by material desires, then the spirit soul is also covered by designations belonging to whatever particular body is there, male, female. Then Prabhupada says, so therefore he considers himself an animal, a man, a demigod, bird, beast, etc. It just depends on the actual body. And this is all false ego. And being covered by these desires, then he distinguishes between matter and spirit. And basically means that he thinks he's matter. Yeah. And he's not aware of there being a spiritual reality that he should be absorbed in. So then Prabhupada says, when one is devoid of those distinctions, then there's no longer a difference between matter and spirit. At that time, the spirit is the predominating factor. But as long as you're covered by material desires, then you think you're the master, the enjoyer, and you act for sense gratification and become subjected to the material pangs of happiness and distress. But when you're freed from that concept of life, then you're no longer subjected to designations, and you see everything as spiritual in connection with the Lord, and therefore everything is just the life of devotional service. So Prabhupada quotes the same verse we referred to just some minutes ago from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Anasaktasya Vishayan Yatarham Upayunjata Nirbandha Krishna Sambandhe Yuktam Vairagyam Uchate. Actually, I'm sorry, we didn't quote this verse. This verse is saying that a liberated person has no personal attachment for anything material or any personal sense gratification. He knows everything's connected with the Lord, and everything should be engaged in the service of the Lord. And therefore he doesn't try to artificially give up anything, detach himself from anything. Just use everything in the service of the Lord without personal attachment. So therefore the advanced devotee, Prabhupada actually talks about the Paramahansa, the very advanced devotee, is able to basically use everything and anything in the service of the Lord. Because originally everything is spiritual, nothing is really material. And Prabhupada then quotes another verse from Chaitanya Charitamrita. It's an interesting verse, not so well known, but very important. Majjhilila 8.274. Stavara Jangama Deke Na Deke Taramurti Sarvachahaya Nija Ishtadeva Spurti. And Prabhupada paraphrases the translation that although the devotee, Mahabhagavat, highly advanced devotee, sees whatever there is in the material world, trees, mountains, living entities, But he sees them all as the creation of the Lord, sees them all as being connected with the Lord. So therefore he sees the Lord, the Creator, and not the created. In other words, he no longer distinguishes between the created and the Creator. And we can give an example, which is not stated here, but it's a nice example. Krishna goes out herding the cows. Mother Yashoda is at home doing household duties. So she's cleaning around, and she comes across a pair of shoes, and she sees, oh, these are Krishna's shoes. So she picks them. They remind her of Krishna. And she cries in ecstasy. She picks up the shoes, holds them to her heart, because they're Krishna's shoes. So in that sense, she's not exactly seeing the shoes, but she's seeing Krishna. So like this, here, Prabhupada's explaining that the devotee sees Krishna everywhere and in everything, as Mother Yashoda didn't exactly see the shoes as such, but she saw Krishna and she reacted to the shoes, not in terms of them simply being shoes, but in terms of them being Krishna's shoes. So seeing Krishna actually. And this is Vaishnava, this is oneness, Prabhupada says. It's Vaishnava oneness. Okay, verse 29. Only because of different causes does a person see a difference between himself and others. Just as one sees the reflection of a body appearing differently manifested on water, on oil, or in a mirror. All right, so Prabhupada again gives an extensive purport, and it's very nice. All these things, Prabhupada's making them very clear with different examples. So Prabhupada says that the spirit soul is one, but that one is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And the one is manifested in different expansions, swangsha and vibhinamsha. Yeah. Swa-angsha means his parts, different forms of himself, in other words. And vibhinamsha means separated forms. Yeah, that's us. That's us. So the different incarnations of the Lord are Shramsha. They're different. So there are different potencies of the Lord. There are different expansions of the potencies. And in this way, Prabhupada says, for different reasons, there are different expansions of the one Lord. So this is real knowledge. But when we're covered by upadhi, the designation, the designated material body, we see differences. Yes. Like one sees sees in reflections of oneself on water, oil, or mirror. When something's reflected on water, it seems to be moving, because generally, at least a lot of the time, the water's moving, and so the reflection is moving with the movement of the water. But on ice, the reflection is fixed, because ice is just fixed. But on oil, it may seem hazy. Yes, so the subject is one, but under different conditions, the subject appears differently. And when the qualifying factor is removed, it appears one. In other words, just to clarify that point, in other words, when one becomes a Paramahansa by practicing Krishna consciousness, Bhakti yoga, then one simply sees Krishna everywhere. And for that person, Paramahansa, there's no other objective other than Krishna. So second paragraph, Prabhupada says, in conclusion, due to different causes, the living entity is visible in different forms, animal, human, demigod, tree, etc. But they're just the bodies. Actually, the living entity, the soul, is the marginal potency of the Lord. And Bhagavad Gita 5:18, famous verse, explains that a person with spiritual vision doesn't distinguish between a Brahmin, dog, elephant, cow, dog-eater even. But the learned person just sees living entity, and living entity in each case, each type of body, is essentially the same eternal spirit soul. The differentiation, the differences between the Brahmin, the dog, the elephant, etc., they're the results of karma, the fruit of activities, the reactions. So when we stop those fruit of activities and do devotional service, then we understand we're not different from anyone else because we're all spirit souls. So despite our external physical bodies being different, in fact, we are not actually different. This is only possible in Krishna consciousness. So therefore in ISKCON, there are all sorts of different people from different races from all over the world. But they all think they're servants of the Lord. They don't think they're black, white, brown, big, small, etc., etc. So the devotees then, at least in purified consciousness, don't differentiate between a black-bodied devotee, a white-bodied devotee, a physically big, physically small, etc. Devotees. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the Krishna consciousness movement is therefore the only means to make the living entities free of all designations. We go on, devotees, to verse 30. When one's mind and senses are attracted to sense objects for enjoyment, the mind becomes agitated. As a result of continually thinking of sense objects, one's real consciousness almost becomes lost. Like the water in a lake that is gradually sucked up by the big grass straws on its bank, the reeds around a lake. They live on the water, they drink the water, that's how they survive. So Prabhupada makes the point, first point he makes, is that this verse nicely explains how our original Krishna consciousness became polluted, so that we ended up almost completely forgetting our relationship with the Supreme Lord. Previous verse said we should always keep in touch with devotional service, engaged in devotional service. So the fire of the devotional service will burn to ashes our material desires, and then we'll become liberated. And this also, Prabhupada says, interesting point, this is how we can indirectly keep faith in the lotus feet of the Lord. So otherwise, when the mind is allowed to think of sense gratification, like regularly or continuously, it becomes the source of our bondage. So if while we're practicing Krishna consciousness, the mind thinks of sense gratification, even though actually really at heart we want Krishna consciousness, but because of material practice, habit, old habits die hard. So because of that practice, we're so practiced in material life, on and on and on, every day, year after year, life after life. We're so habituated to it that sometimes, or however often, even though devotees want to be Krishna conscious, still we struggle to forget sense gratification. So therefore, if a devotee takes sannyas but can't control the mind, he'll think of sense gratification. Family, society, nice house, etc. And even if he goes to the Himalayas or to the forest, he'll think of these things. And his intelligence will be affected, and he'll lose his taste for Krishna consciousness. It can definitely happen, put it that way. And definitely it sometimes does. But if one, so to speak, fights the good fight and really tries to keep engaged in devotional service, then one can, and step by step progress and become purified and eventually come to the completely pure level. So, second paragraph, Prabhupada says, the example given here is very appropriate. If a lake, all around a big lake, there's long kusha grass, or like reeds, that sort of type of grass, or relative of grass, like columns, Prabhupada says, then the water, certainly the water can become reduced, even the water can just dry up altogether. Similarly, when material desires increase, the clear water of our consciousness, of our Krishna consciousness, it's dried up. So therefore the grass should be cut, thrown away from the beginning, just removed, got rid of. Yes, means all those attachments. So Lord Chaitanya says that if from the beginning in our lives, in Krishna consciousness, we don't take care of the unwanted grass, we don't get rid of the unwanted grass in the rice field, the grass will use up the fertilizer and water, and the rice will dry up. So, as soon as you go in there, into the field, gotta just get rid of all the weeds, just get them out. And then you plant your rice, fertilize it, water it, it'll grow nicely. So these material desires for sense gratification are the cause of our fall down to this world. Prabhupada says that. Cause of our fall down in, Prabhupada says, in this world, let's use the right term. Yeah. And therefore we suffer the threefold miseries, adi atmic, adi bautic, adi daivik, and we suffer birth, death, old age, and disease. But if we turn our desires to devotional service, the desires become purified. We cannot kill desire. It will be there, but we have to purify the desires from the undesirable, the designations. And if we constantly think we're from a particular nation, society, caste, etc., we become very strongly entangled in the conditioned life of birth and death. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, but If our desires are applied to the service of the Lord, they become purified. And thus we become immediately freed from material contamination. Applying our desires to the service of the Lord means that we start thinking, how can I serve? How can I improve my service? How can I achieve more for the Lord? How can I serve in a mood of really trying to please the Lord and not become a famous devotee or get some prominence, something like that, some benefit for myself. So on we go, devotees. We'll do one more verse, I think. Let me just check here. Yeah, we'll do verse 31. The purport is not so long. Verse 31, when one deviates from his original consciousness, means Krishna consciousness. That's our original consciousness. Isn't that interesting? Prabhupada makes it so clear. So when one deviates from his original consciousness, he loses the capacity to remember his previous position or recognize his present one. When remembrance is lost, all knowledge acquired is based on a false foundation. When this occurs, learned scholars consider that the soul is lost. That's pretty powerful, isn't it? So anyway, the soul is ever existing, the living entity, eternal, can't really be lost. But some scholars say that when its knowledge of who and what it is lost, then sort of effectively you could say the soul is lost. And Prabhupada makes the point, this is the difference between animals and humans. Of course, less intelligent philosophers, we all know, they say animals have no soul, therefore they're different from us, therefore we can eat them. But actually, the animals do have souls. But due to their ignorance, they just seem to be totally on the bodily platform. But obviously, without a soul, the body can't move. That's the difference between a living body and a dead body. That's as fundamental as you can get in Krishna consciousness. So when it's said the soul is lost, it means it's not exhibiting proper knowledge of itself. So the original consciousness is Krishna consciousness, because we are part and parcel of him. But then when our consciousness is misguided and we're absorbed in the material atmosphere, then we think we're products of that material atmosphere. So then we lose remembrance of our position as part and parcel of the Lord. Just as a sleeping person forgets himself. So therefore, when the activities of proper consciousness are checked, the activities of the lost soul are performed on a false basis. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, at the present moment, human civilization is acting on a false platform of bodily identification. Therefore, it can be said that the people of the present age have lost their souls, and in this respect, they are no better than animals, right, in human forms. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.